Hello, this is Dave from the Wizard's Keep in Muncie, Indiana, and I'm continuing counting down my top 60 board games of all time. And in this video, I'll be counting down number 20 to 11. So, in previous videos, all the games in the previous videos of my top 60 games of all time, I've really enjoyed, but now we're starting to get into the really good games. And to start off, my number 20 is from designer Uwe Rosenberg, and that is Mercator. Mercator is a pick up and deliver game. And if you're not familiar with a pick up and deliver game, what that means is, well, kind of what it sounds. It means you're going to one place, picking up some good or some resource, and taking it to another place, kind of dropping it off or delivering it, and usually to get some sort of victory points or to get some other resource or fulfill a contract that gives you different benefits. And Mercator's no different. But what makes Mercator kind of interesting is where a lot of pick up and deliver games, that process takes several turns. So maybe on one turn you go to a location, you pick something up, and then it might take you a couple more turns to get across the board, and then you find and deliver that good. In Mercator, you pick up the good and deliver it right away. Certain things, how they kind of simulate that distance of travel is you have like time. Certain things cost time units. So physically, or you're doing it all in one turn, but in the course of the game, it kind of symbolizes that some actions may still take longer. But the great thing is you don't have to sit around and wait. You just do it and be done. And the next turn, you go pick up another gun and deliver somewhere else. And that's one thing I really like about Mercator quite a bit. My number 19 game was in my top 10 list of gateway games, and that is Splendor. Splendor, since it was in my top 10 gateway games, it's kind of a lighter game, but it's a great one. I love pulling it out. Like if I just got home from work and I don't have a lot of time to maybe play a game, or maybe I've played another game and a kind of heavier one, and I want to still play another game, but I'm like, I don't want to grab another heavy game. This is always kind of like my go-to game for that occasion. And in Splendor, what you're doing is you basically on your turn you have two choices. You're either going to pick up chips which represent different gems, or you're going to spend those gems to buy different cards. And the benefit of those cards you're buying is, well, every card has like a gem itself on the card, which means that in future turns, it's going to take less of your resources to buy future cards. So a little bit of like an engine building. Also, as you get to more valuable cards or more expensive cards, they're going to have victory points on them, and that's essentially how you win the game. And that is Splendor. My number 18 game is a worker placement game, and that is Stone Age. Now, Stone Age, like a lot of worker placement games, is you have different workers. You're going to place them in different zones on the board to either acquire resources or to do different actions. The difference in Stone Age is most of the time, most of the locations you're placing workers on the board, usually the ones that generate resources for you, you're going to roll a die for each worker you place. The more valuable resources take a higher total to acquire them, like gold for every 6 point or whatever pips you roll on your die, you're going to get a gold. But where wood, it's every 3, so you'll get twice as much wood as you would from gold rolling the same number on the dice. So those are some kind of considerations when you're placing your different workers out. How many workers you need to place on a location to kind of get the resources that you're counting on to fulfill, either to buy different huts, which give you victory points, or to spend them to buy different boats, which is kind of has a set collecting aspect to it. Like a lot of worker placement games, you have to also generate food for your workers, and at the end of every round you have to feed your workers or you take a penalty. And you can also grow your workers. You start off with 5 workers, but over the course of the game, one of the spots on the board you put 2 workers in, and at the end of the turn you grab a 3rd worker. So you're going to be kind of building your pool of workers so you can get more actions, but that's also more workers you have to feed, so you have to kind of consider that. And so it's a pretty light worker placement game, but kind of in the similar vein of Splendor. Sometimes I kind of like those games where I can kind of just veg out and play a game and just enjoy playing the game, where it doesn't give me a headache when I'm done. So that's Stone Age. My number 17 is also a worker placement game, but this one's a little bit of a different twist to it. And that's by the designer Ryan Lockett, and that is Above and Below. A lot of people, and like in my last video, I guess, Near and Far was in my last video, and that was kind of seen as a sequel to this game, Above and Below. And a lot of people's lists, or a lot of different board game enthusiasts, will kind of say Near and Far was just the improved upon Above and Below. And now in some ways it has. In my last video, I kind of talked about how the storytelling system of Near and Far is superior to Above and Below. But the game mechanics of Above and Below, in my opinion, are better than Near and Far. So Near and Far is great because it has that campaign mode, but if you're just doing a one-off game, I like Above and Below a lot better. Because Above and Below, at its heart, is a worker placement game, and as you can kind of tell, there's a trend here. I like worker placement games. And what you're doing in Above and Below, where different than other worker placement games, and if you remember the last video from Near and Far, it's got a storytelling element. So you've got above and below. So you're placing different workers to get different resources, use those resources to buy different buildings. And when you buy a building, you can kind of place it above ground, and it's going to generate different points. Maybe it generates different goods, or maybe it's just worth victory points at the end of the game. Or you've got caverns underneath, which you can place buildings. The buildings that you place in the caverns tend to be more powerful or worth more, but it's a lot harder to place the buildings in your caverns. Your above area, you have unlimited amount of space. You can just keep building new buildings. Your below ground, though, you have to have an empty cavern to place that building. So if you don't have an empty cavern, you have to go explore a cavern to kind of clear it out. And that exploring that cavern, what you do is you're going to make a die roll on a random card, and that's going to tell what scenario, what story, choose your own adventure like story or problem you have to solve. So at that point, you roll the number. Another player is going to read a section in the book that's going to kind of be some sort of like story that gives you some sort of choice, and usually you know the difficulty of the challenge, but you don't know the outcome of either choice. So you kind of choose based on that which difficulty, or maybe which option you think in the story makes the most sense. What's going to give you the reward that you want, and then you make die rolls and see if you're successful or not against that challenge. And then that's how you kind of clear out the cavern, so you can place other buildings in the below area. And I just like that a lot better than Near and Far, even though the story system of Near and Far is superior. My number 16, we're seeing a trend here. This is another worker placement game. A lot of worker placement games in this video, as we're nearing closer to number 1, because I just love worker placement games. And so if they come out with a new worker placement game, I'm always going to check it out. And my number 16 is Ex Libris. Now, Ex Libris, worker placement game, but it also has a little bit of a set collection or something different going on. What you're doing in the Ex Libris, the theme is you're in this village, and this village, the players are different members of this village, and the village has decided that they're going to make one of the players' book collection the local library, or the village is looking to build a local library, so you're all kind of vying to basically collect the best collection of books in order to become the librarian for the village. And how you do that is you're going to, by placing workers on different spots on the board, to get different cards. And those cards are going to be different sections of books. And then when you place your worker on that location, you get the cards. You're basically either it's going to allow you to put cards in your hand, or to take cards from your hand and place them down on the board in front of you, kind of building your library. But the catch is you got to make sure that your library, when you're placing the books, are in alphabetical order. So as the game goes on, the more difficult it gets, because you only can build up to like 3 levels. So once you get like 3 levels, then you can't keep putting books everywhere. You're going to have to put them either to the left or right of a book or a bookcase you've already got in play. Also, randomly each game, the village determines there's 6 different categories of books, and the village is going to determine randomly which category of book is like their preferred book. So that's going to get bonus points for the player that has the most of a category of certain books. And then also there's going to be a group of banned books or forbidden books. You can still play them, but for every forbidden book that you have in your library, you're going to lose a point. Now, in some ways you could try to avoid the forbidden books altogether, but you might find yourself picking up a card because it has other books that you need for your library, and you figure the cost of those books or the points you're getting from that's going to outweigh the negative points you get from the banned book. So you're going to have all books in your library. And then that's the last thing is you also will get points based on you take all the category of books you have in your library, and whichever one you have the least amount of in your library, you're going to gain points for that. So it kind of encourages you to build a balance to your library as well. So there's a lot of different considerations going on. The worker placement element is you have 3 workers. 2 workers are kind of generic workers. You just kind of place on different spots to generate cards. But your 3rd worker is going to be unique to you. There's going to be there's a gelatinous cube. There's a robot worker. There's a witch worker, a wizard worker, and they all have special powers. And when you place them, like the wizard actually lets you take books and put them in between bookcases that you've already played, which is very, very powerful because otherwise other players, are kind of stuck with making sure that they're having a harder time being able to place books down on the board because as the game goes on. And the wizard allows you to kind of cheat on that a little bit. And that is Ex Libris. My number 15, surprisingly, is not a worker placement game. It's kind of an economic game. And this one's been around for a while. This is probably one of the oldest games that I have, and one of the oldest games that really got me into playing board games after I played Settlers of Catan and Carcassonne. And that is Power Grid. Now, Power Grid, this has kind of been, last couple times I've done, where I didn't do videos, but I did write-ups on Facebook of my top 40 and my top 50 games the last couple years. Power Grid was always in my top 10. It's kind of dropped a little bit, not because I think the game's any weaker than it was, it's just more games have come out and I've played more games. But Power Grid is still very, very good. If you're not familiar with Power Grid, what you're doing in Power Grid is basically each player kind of has their own power company. And you're going to be trying to get different cities that you're placing, you're kind of placing houses in. That kind of represents places you have extended your electrical grid to. And then you're going to have an auction system, auction to buy different power plants, more efficient power plants. Plus, it's got this economic system where you're going to also, or supply and demand system on different goods like coal and oil and uranium and trash even. It's like these different resources to power your power plants. It has the most interesting kind of supply and demand system I've seen in a board game because as more and more people, because every round I guess the goods get replaced, but they only get replaced at a set number. So if more people are buying these goods off the board, and basically every time you pick a piece off the board, there's going to be a number under, and that's going to get higher and higher. So maybe one round, each coal is worth like three coins, but you've bought too many of them, so they don't get replaced. So now the next player, it's going to be four points when they buy coal the next turn, and so on. So part of the thing is also kind of finding your niche. Maybe you're the only person that's burning trash to power plants, and though trash doesn't replenish very fast, but if you're the only one vying for it, then it's going to be cheaper for you in the long run. So lots of considerations there. So as an auctioning system, you get this cash flow money efficiency system because every turn you get money for powering your power plants, and then you take that money in subsequent turns to auction for power plants, buy resources to power your power plants, and then buy new city connections, which allow, and then when you power those cities, you get even more money and so on. So it's kind of this, you're building this infrastructure that just keeps getting bigger and bigger that continues to pay you off so you can build a bigger infrastructure and so on. And whoever does that the most efficiently is going to win Power Grid. It's a very mathy game because you got to be constantly considering how much money am I going to spend to buy this power plant, or how much good, because I need this much money to buy these goods, and to leave me this much money so I can expand my grid this turn. So lots of different things you're thinking of, and that's why I really like Power Grid. My number 14 is where a lot of these other games here, I'm a big fan of Euro games, so a lot of these other games are starting to see a lot of Euro games really making its way to the top of the list. And this one kind of sneaks in as kind of a non-Euro game, or at least a game with a non-traditional Euro game theme, even though some of the mechanics it's definitely about the mechanics of this game. And that is, my number 14 is Roll Player. Now, Role Player has, as it sounds, it's like a very fantasy-themed game. It's kind of the concept is very meta. The concept is you're designing or rolling up your fantasy role play, basically your D&D character. And how you do that is, well, with dice, as you would expect. But in this case, you're going to be drafting dice. So you're going to take turns around the table. Someone's going to roll dice, and you roll dice equal to the number of players plus one. So if you had 4 people playing, you're going to roll 5 dice. And then those dice are going to get laid out in numerical order and value. So if you rolled like a 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, then you're going to put those in that order. They're going to be on cards. There'll be a card, a number 1, a number 2, and number 3, and number 4, and number 5, and so on. And so you're going to place those cards in numeric order. And then whoever rolled the dice is going to decide which die they want. Now, the higher dice do tend to be the better die for you. Because what you're going to do with those dice, you're going to place them on your different stats, like you expect in like Dungeons and Dragons. So you got like a strength score, and a dex score, and an intelligence score, and so on. So you have 6 different stats. So you're going to take those and 3 different slots, or spots in a die, and for each stat. Because when you know, for those who know, when you roll up a D&D character, you're rolling up like 3d6 and taking those and allocating those points to your attributes. And so what you're going to do with these dice is once you draft it, you're going to put it in a slot over either the strength, intelligence, dexterity score, and whichever attribute you place it in is going to have a special ability. So if you place like a die in the Constitution score, for example, it allows you to take one of your dice on the board and click it up 1 pip or like 1 value or down 1 value. Because depending on your character class you've got, it's going to tell you which stats you want in certain, or what stats you want in each attribute. So in some cases you may have a stat, say like a fighter, so it says, well, you need a 14 or 13 or 14 in intelligence. So in some cases you might want to tick your stats down to make sure you're in that 14 slot. Or, you know, you're a fighter, so you need an 18 in strength. And so you might, then you put your die in your Constitution and click up one of your strength die to get it closer to 18. But then the other thing you do when you draft, because you lay out the dice out, and so whoever rolls the dice is going to draft a die, but you don't always want to take the highest die, because the second phase of the game, or what you're going to do, is the market phase, and that goes in order based on the numbers on the cards of the die you drafted. So if, let's say, when it's your turn, there's something in the marketplace you really, really want. So what you end up doing is taking one of the lower dies, like maybe the 2 in the example I gave, and that gets you the number 1 card. So when it comes to the market phase, you get to buy the first card out of the marketplace. And so there's a lot of considerations there. The theme is great because I kind of got into gaming with Dungeons and Dragons, and I've rolled up numerous characters over my gaming life, and so it's kind of a theme that really kind of grabs me. But then also the game is really, really solid as well, because you're it's just like this puzzle of trying to figure out where, you know, which dice you need and when to draft higher dice, or when do you need to make sure draft a lower dice so you can go to the marketplace because there's an item in there that you really, really want. There's a lot of different things that generate points for you in this game. Either the getting your attributes to the numbers you want them to be, the character class you to have determined, or tells you it gives you a color of die that gives you bonus points, because the dice are all of different colors too. So if you're like the fighter, I think it's the red die, so every red die you have on your board is worth a point. Your background will tell you to have certain color die in certain positions, so you have to consider that. You have an alignment, whatever your alignment is going to be. It starts off at neutral, but based on different attributes or skills and abilities that you pick and use, it moves your alignment up and down. So like if you pick a lot of like roguish like abilities, like a pickpocket, it's going to move your character more chaotic. So if you have like a chaotic alignment, you are going to naturally go to some of those rogue-like abilities to be able to move your alignment in that direction. So there's just a lot of different things going on, and essentially what you're doing every turn, there's always something going on every turn. Every turn you're thinking, maybe I should do this to get points, or I need to do this to get points. So there's always lots and lots of options, and that's what I like about this game. Okay, now my 13 and 12 are very, very similar games, and part of the reason why they're back to back is because I kind of waffle which one. The games are so similar that in one hand they really are almost like the same game. With it feels like you're playing one game with a different expansion. Like for example, I always think of like Carcassonne has a lot of great expansions, but I would never play all the expansions of Carcassonne at once. And so this kind of feels like playing a game like Carcassonne with maybe the Princess and the Dragon expansion, so the game's very different than the base game that way. And next time you play Carcassonne, you play it with the Inns and Cathedrals, so it's a very different game, but you can tell it's kind of still Carcassonne. Well, my number, I'll do these at the same time here, if I can. These are really big boxes. So my number 13 and my number 12 are by designer Uwe Rosenberg, and that is Caverna and Agricola. Both very, very big games, chock full of bits and pieces and wooden meeples of cows and pigs and sheep and things like that. And I'm going to set these down. But what they are, they're worker placement games. But with only what they both do is they're worker placement games. You have different places on the board where you place workers. You start off with 2 members of your family, and every round you're going to draw a random card that kind of generates a new space. So every turn you get more and more spaces to place workers. And you're going to place those workers on the board to generate different actions to allow you to do things for different victory points. And then you're going to breed more workers to give you more actions as the game goes on. But every turn you've got to feed your people. So like Stone Age, a very kind of similar concept that's in a lot of worker placement games. Breeding or making more workers, but having to feed them as a balance. Well, the difference is like in Agricola, you're also at the beginning of the game, you're going to draft these different cards, and these cards are different improvements. And you take so you may over the course of the game play these cards for different other abilities. The theme of both games is kind of your farmers. Agricola is a little more, I guess, grounded in like a realism. Caverna is is cave farmers, so it's a little more of a or dwarven cave farmers. So it's like a fantasy element, but besides them just saying, "Hey, these are dwarves," that aspect of the game doesn't play too much different. Other than Agricola is all a pastoral, so like fields. So you're building fences and placing animals in them, and then breeding those animals to generate more cows or more sheep and etc. But then you're going to draft different cards in Agricola, and with those cards you're going to be able to play for different abilities, and that's the main difference of Agricola. Agricola is a little bit harder to feed your people, and that's probably why I put Caverna above it. Even though that kind of concept of feeding your people in worker placement games is kind of to give you some sort of pressure each turn to kind of force you to keep producing, but also at the same time it's a little tedious because sometimes you're picking actions to go just generate food when you'd rather use that action to pick something more fun. And Caverna is a little easier to feed your people, so as a result Caverna tends to be more fun because you get more turns of picking fun stuff as opposed to feeding your people stuff. The other thing on Caverna is it's kind of has 2 zones, sort of like this above and below concept, where you've got a pasture field and then you've got your caves as well. So the difference being is you can kind of build into these. So you're building into the caves and mining the caves for different stone and rubies and coal and things like that. You can use the resources, or you're going to be clearing field for wood or clearing field to kind of build pastures for animals. So that's another difference between that and Agricola. The last being there's also, where in Agricola you got different cards. This one you've got buildings that you're kind of getting. There's a numerous. This is the replayability of this stuff. Caverna is that every game, I've never felt like. By the end of the game, I always felt like, man, there's so many more things I wanted to do, and usually because there's so many more buildings in the game. And in the course of the game, you might build 5 or 6 buildings, and there's like 100 buildings or something, it seems. So there's always a lot of replayability in both games. And Agricola's kind of the same, except that instead of the buildings, the cards. There's just way more cards than you ever see. So every time you play, you're going to be, getting kind of a different mix. And that's why I like about these games and what kind of draws me to keep playing them over and over. And then, at the end of the video here, my number 11, not a worker placement game, but kind of an engine building game, and that is Food Chain Magnate. Now, Food Chain Magnet's kind of weird, whereas just the previous games, Agricola and Caverna have amazing components. And Food Chain Magnet, well, I mean, the back of the box is even blank. So it kind of looks like it's a prototype game, which is really weird because it's out of the games I had today, it's the most expensive game. It retails like $120, which makes it really difficult. I actually don't even carry this in the Wizard's Keep, and primarily is because of the cost. Because it's a weird game because in some ways, it's a very, very good game. One of my favorite games. I love playing it, but I don't know if I could recommend it or not because it costs so much and the components are so drab. But the game is amazing because what you do in the game is you're building kind of an engine. You start off, it's kind of like it has this kind of 50s look because it's kind of like back in the 50s where you're starting your fast food franchises, where all the kind of fast food establishments at the time were very, very kind of wonky, and everybody was experimenting, doing new things. Because like McDonald's hadn't dominated the field and created and everybody else just followed what McDonald's was doing. So this is like you're kind of one of these early fast food franchises. Starting off. So you start off with one restaurant, and then over the course of the game, you might get a few more restaurants around town. You've got to do advertising to kind of get people to want different goods. They're like your cheeseburgers or your pizza or whatnot. And so you have to do different advertising campaigns. But you start off with just yourself. You're just like your CEO. So you have to hire more people. And that's where you kind of build the chain, the food chain, because the chain is you'll hire some managers, and then you get some managers under them or different other workers under them. So you've kind of built this pyramid, and each person has their own actions. So you're generating more actions each turn as you're hiring more and more workers to do different things. So your first turn, you may build your first restaurant or something like that. Maybe you're like, oh, I made some burgers. By the end of it, you're making burgers and pizza and soft drinks for like multiple restaurants, and you're advertising for multiple restaurants. And so it's a very kind of thinky game, kind of like Power Grid, where you're constantly trying to each turn kind of allocate your resources in your head, going, okay, I need to do this money for this. I need these guys to do this so I can get, I need these guys to make the cheeseburgers. I need these guys to advertise for the cheeseburgers so these people over here will want my cheeseburgers. And then you're kind of doing all these different things. So that's why I like about it, because it just starts off small and kind of builds up to something bigger. And whoever does that the most efficiently is going to win this game. And that is my top 20 to 11 board games of all time. Next week, hopefully I will try to get my top 10 games of all time. And so if you have any questions about any of these games or any games in general, feel free to stop into the Wizard's Keep or message me on Facebook. And until next time, thank you for watching.